On the day of my baby shower, everything seemed flawless from the outside, as if the universe had aligned to give me a memory that I could treasure forever, and for a moment, I actually believed it. The house was decorated with pastel balloons in shades of pink and blue, ribbons cascaded down from the ceiling, and little trinkets of joy were scattered across the tables where plates of desserts and cupcakes sat neatly. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the sweetness of frosting in the air, and the sound of laughter echoed in every corner. My friends and family surrounded me with smiles, hugging me tightly, telling me how radiant I looked, how lucky I was to be stepping into motherhood with so much love and care around me. I wore a dress I had picked weeks earlier, one that flowed easily over my growing belly, and I felt every bit of the glowing mother-to-be that people kept calling me. The flashes of cameras captured my smile, my hands resting on my stomach, my husband standing beside me, and it all looked perfect, too perfect, like a scene from a fairy tale. But perfection has a way of blinding you, tricking you into believing that what you see is what's real, even when shadows lurk just beyond the lights. I laughed with my guests, posed for pictures, cut the cake, and opened presents, all while convincing myself that the joy I felt was pure and unshakable. Every gift carried with it the warmth of the people who had come to celebrate me. Every word spoken felt like a blessing meant to guide me into this new chapter. I held on to those little moments, the way people clapped when I revealed the baby's gender, the way children danced around the table, the way my mother's eyes glistened with pride as she looked at me. It was supposed to be one of the most memorable days of my life, a day to lock away in my heart forever. Still, beneath the laughter, I noticed small things, things that I brushed away too quickly at the time, but that would later haunt me with clarity. My husband's smile, though wide, didn't quite reach his eyes. His phone buzzed more than once, and each time, he excused himself just long enough to answer, returning with a face that carried both guilt and an unconvincing attempt at normalcy. People might have thought nothing of it, but I saw it, the slight stiffness in his movements, the way his hand gripped the phone tighter than it should. When our friends teased him about fatherhood, he laughed, but it was hollow, like the sound of something breaking in slow motion. I shook it off, convincing myself that he was simply nervous, that he was overwhelmed by the attention, that men often didn't know how to carry their emotions as openly as women did. I told myself that this was not the time to question anything, that today was about happiness, and so I buried my unease deep down beneath my rehearsed smile. The perfect day continued, each moment layering itself over the other, building a picture so glossy that even I wanted to believe it. The photographs caught me glowing, laughing, hugging, but what they didn't capture was the flicker of doubt that occasionally crossed my mind. I remember holding a small baby onesie in my hands, a gift from a close friend, and imagining my child wearing it, imagining the life I was building, the family I thought I had. That thought warmed me, soothed me, and for a few seconds, it silenced the strange heaviness in my chest. But then I would catch him in the corner of my eye, looking down at his phone again, his expression tightening before he slipped it back into his pocket, as though hiding something fragile, something dangerous. Even in the middle of joy, there are whispers, small cracks in the glass that most people ignore, but once you see them, you can't unsee them. I felt those cracks forming, thin lines that cut through the perfect. That day was supposed to belong to me, to my child, to the love and care of everyone around me, and in many ways it did. To the people who came, it was a celebration of life, of new beginnings, of joy wrapped in pastel ribbons. They didn't see the tension lingering in the background, the unease tucked into the edges of smiles, the silence that screamed louder than the music playing. They saw a glowing woman surrounded by love, and that's what I tried to see too. But perfection is a fragile thing, and the more you hold onto it, the more it cuts you when it shatters. The baby shower became a memory etched into my mind, not just for the laughter, not just for the balloons and flowers, but for the way it disguised the truth. It was a curtain pulled tightly across the stage, hiding a story I didn't know was being written behind it. It was the calm before the storm, the silence before the explosion, the smile before the scream. What should have been the happiest day of my life turned into the most ironic setup, A cruel joke played by fate. A flawless performance where the truth sat quietly, waiting for the moment it would rip through the fabric of my world. The discovery didn't arrive like thunder, it crept in quietly, almost silently, until it stood right in front of me and I could no longer pretend it wasn't real. I had always believed betrayal would announce itself with a dramatic scene, maybe a heated argument, or a confession forced out under pressure, but instead, it came to me in fragments, in whispers, in pieces of evidence that seemed harmless until they stitched themselves together into a picture I couldn't unsee. At first, it was his phone, the way he clung to it like it was more precious than the life we were about to bring into the world. He kept it face down on the table, always on silent, and whenever it buzzed, he slipped away, excusing himself with the same rehearsed lines, "It's work," or "just a friend." I wanted to believe him, because believing him mean. The shock was physical, like my body rejected the reality my eyes had just absorbed. My chest grew heavy, my hands shook, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Betrayal doesn't just hurt the heart, it seeps into your bones, into your very core, until it feels like poison running through your veins. I looked at the man I had loved, the man I had trusted to be my partner, my protector, the father of my child, and suddenly he was a stranger. Every memory replayed in my mind, every laugh, every touch, every word of love, and all of it twisted into something ugly, tainted by the knowledge that it had been shared with someone else. The cruelest part was the timing. I was carrying his child, building a family, dedicating every ounce of myself to the future we were supposed to share, while he was dedicating himself to another woman. I thought about the nights I lay awake dreaming of the life ahead of us, how I whispered to the baby inside me about the love that awaited them, how I planned a world of stability and safety, all while he was tearing it apart in secret. It wasn't just betrayal of me, it was betrayal of our child, betrayal of the promise of a family, betrayal of everything we had vowed to build together. When I confronted him, his face gave him away before his words ever did. The panic in his eyes, the hesitation in his voice, the way he stumbled over excuses, it all confirmed what I already knew. He tried to twist the story, tried to make me doubt my own judgment, tried to convince me it wasn't what it looked like, but once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. His denial was weak, his apologies shallow, and I realized in that moment that the man I thought I married no longer existed. He had been replaced by someone selfish, deceitful, someone capable of betraying not just a wife, but a mother-to-be, someone who didn't deserve the life we had created together. The betrayal cut deeper than words could describe, because it wasn't just about another woman, it was about the destruction of trust, the breaking of a foundation I thought was unshakable. Trust is fragile, and once it shatters, it doesn't just crack, it explodes into pieces so small that no amount of forgiveness can glue them back together. I felt those pieces scattering around me, cutting into me with every breath, reminding me that the life I thought I had was nothing but an illusion. The laughter at the baby shower, the smiles captured in photos, the dreams whispered late at night, they all turned to ash the moment I saw him for what he truly was. And yet, amid the wreckage, something else began to stir. Pain turned into anger, anger into fire, and that fire began to consume the weakness I had once clung to. I realized that his betrayal had awakened a strength inside me I never knew I possessed, a strength born not out of love, but out of survival. If he thought his lies would break me, he was wrong. If he thought his secret would bury me in despair, he underestimated me. What he had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a declaration, a challenge, and I knew then that I would not sit silently in the role of the victim. The discovery of his cheating was not just the end of my trust, it was the birth of my resolve. It opened my eyes to the reality that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can destroy you, and that survival means standing up from the ruins and taking control of your story. My husband had written betrayal into the script of my life, but I would decide how the rest of the story unfolded. The truth had been revealed, and though it tore through me like glass, it also sharpened me, hardened me, and prepared me for what came next. The pain of broken trust is not something that simply sits quietly in your chest, it spreads through every vein, every thought, every breath you take until it consumes you entirely. When I first realized that the man I had loved, the man I was about to raise a child with, had betrayed me, it felt like the ground beneath me gave way. I had spent so long building my life around him, weaving my dreams around the idea of us, that when the betrayal revealed itself, it wasn't just him who fell apart, it was everything I thought I knew. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her hands trembling from rage, her heart bleeding from a wound too deep to see. I had imagined pain before, I had imagined heartbreak, but nothing could prepare me for the reality of being deceived by the person I trusted with my soul. At first, the pain was sharp, unbearable, like a knife twisted again and again, but then it became something else, something heavier. It was a silence that lingered in the room even when people spoke. It was the weight on my chest that kept me from sleeping at night. It was the ache in my stomach when I tried to eat. The betrayal stole not just my happiness, but my appetite, my rest, my peace. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many times he had looked me in the eye while carrying this secret, how many times he had touched me with the. What hurt the most was not even the cheating itself, but the realization that I had been living in a lie. Every moment we had shared replayed in my mind, but now it was tainted, poisoned. The sweet words he whispered late at night now sounded like rehearsed lines, the promises he made now felt like jokes he had played on me. Every smile, every kiss, every memory I had once held sacred was now stained by betrayal. It was as though my entire past had been rewritten, and I was left wondering if anything had ever been real. The foundation I had built my love on was not cracked, it was obliterated, and I was left standing among the rubble, trying to breathe through the dust of what was destroyed. But pain is not a passive thing. It transforms. It twists into something else when it has nowhere else to go. For me, that transformation began slowly, almost quietly. At first, it was just anger, a flicker deep inside me, rising whenever I thought of his lies, whenever I imagined him with her. That anger grew, feeding on the injustice of it all, feeding on the cruelty of betraying not just a wife, but a pregnant wife, a woman carrying his child. The more I thought about it, the more that anger spread until it replaced the helplessness. Tears turned into fire, silence turned into screams inside my mind, and that fire became a companion I could no longer ignore. It was in the small moments that I felt it most clearly. When he spoke to me with that false tenderness, pretending to care, I felt the fire burn hotter. When I remembered how he stood beside me at the baby shower, smiling for the cameras while lying with his heart, I felt the fire climb higher. When I imagined the life I had given up for him, the sacrifices I had made believing we were building something together, I felt the fire consume every trace of the woman who had once trusted him. Rage was not just an emotion anymore, it was survival. It gave me strength when the pain threatened to bury me, it gave me energy when The silence between us grew heavier after the truth surfaced. I would watch him, every move he made, every word he spoke, dissecting it, analyzing it, waiting for another lie to reveal itself. Trust was dead, and in its place was suspicion, cold and sharp. Every time his phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. Every time he left the room, I wondered who he was with, what he was hiding. Even when he tried to act normal, when he tried to pretend nothing had happened, I could see through it. His eyes betrayed him more than his words ever could. And the worst part was that he knew I knew, yet he carried on, as though the pieces of my heart weren't scattered on the floor, as though my rage wasn't growing stronger with every passing day. The pain carved me into someone I had never been before. I was no longer the woman who blindly trusted, who gave love without question, who believed in promises spoken in the dark. That woman had died with the betrayal, and in her place rose someone harder, someone colder, someone who would never again allow herself to be deceived so easily. And yet, beneath that hardness, the fire kept burning, reminding me of what I had lost, reminding me of what had been taken from me. It wasn't just about losing a husband, it was about losing faith in love, losing innocence, losing the dream of a happy family. Betrayal stole not just a relationship, but an entire future I had planned. I felt the rage growing louder in my silence. It whispered to me when I was alone, telling me not to forget, not to forgive, not to let him walk away unscathed. It told me that if I stayed silent, if I accepted his lies, then I was surrendering to the role of victim. I could not bear to see myself that way, not anymore. I had already been broken, but I refused to remain broken. If he had turned my love into a weapon against me, then I would turn my pain into a weapon against him. That transformation was not immediate, but it was inevitable. The more I thought of his betrayal, the moment I decided I would no longer be the victim was not cinematic or sudden, it came like a slow, irrevocable settling of something heavy into place inside me, a decision forged from rage, clarity, and the cold recognition that my life and my child deserved better than passive acceptance. 4 weeks after I found out, I had been moving through the motions, smiling when needed, answering questions, performing normalcy for the cameras and the relatives, while my insides tore and stitched themselves into knots of fear and fury. But there is a point where grief curdles into something else, where you stop waiting for someone else to save you, and instead begin to map out how you will save yourself. That evening, as I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe, I felt that map drawing itself in my mind, lines becoming routes, and routes becoming a plan I could follow. I would not be the person who was quietly broken and left behind. I would be deliberate, measured, and unrelenting. It started with small, practical decisions that felt like tiny rebellions at first but later combined into a strategy. I changed passwords, secured accounts, and began to document everything, texts, photos, receipts, because betrayal taught me the importance of proof. Details that once seemed trivial suddenly mattered, time-stamps, places, whispered names. I created a folder, both digital and physical, where every piece of evidence could live. Holding those pages, scrolling through messages that once made my stomach flutter with naive love, I felt a curious sense of power. Evidence is truth you can hold between your hands, and truth would be my weapon and my shield. I told myself that I would not be manipulated into doubt again. If needed, I would build a fortress of facts one document at a time. But planning revenge, or reclaiming your life, requires more than evidence. It requires a reset of the soul, a recalibration of how you value yourself. I began to stand differently in rooms, But planning revenge, or reclaiming your life, requires more than evidence. It requires a reset of the soul, a recalibration of how you value yourself. I began to stand differently in rooms. I practiced speaking with firmness so the tremor of hurt could not be mistaken for weakness. I sought counsel, friends who knew the truth, an attorney who could explain my legal options, a therapist who could remind me that rage could be channeled without destroying me. Each conversation sharpened my purpose. The lawyer mapped out custody possibilities, financial separations, and protective measures. The therapist taught me that my anger was valid, but that clarity would win where chaos might fail. I built a small, trusted circle, people who would not sway under pressure, who would keep my secrets safe and my dignity intact. Allies matter when you are walking a path that requires both courage and cunning. There were nights when the plan felt impossible, when the simplest task, washing dishes, folding baby clothes, seemed monumental under the weight of betrayal. In those moments, I focused on the practical, finances, appointments, medical records. I made a budget for the first time, revealing how reliant I had been, how much of my life had flowed into him without scrutiny. That was another kind of awakening, the realization that independence is often built slowly out of necessity, and I was suddenly willing to be rigorous and relentless about it. I scheduled meetings, I called people, I made lists with little boxes that I could tick off. Each checked box was a small victory, and the accumulation of victories strengthened me in ways raw emotion never could. I also planned emotionally. Revenge in the movies is loud and spectacular, but in reality it is often a quieter arithmetic of consequences and reclaiming dignity. I rehearsed conversations where I would no longer beg for truth but demand it. I imagined how I would speak when people asked why. Not with explanations that invited pity, but with calm, controlled statements that reflected my values and my plan. I practiced boundaries. When he tried to gaslight me, when he said I was overreacting, or that I was imagining things, I documented his words, recorded conversations when legal, and kept my cool. Anger, I learned, is useful when it is paired with restraint. It fuels action, but does not undermine credibility. At the same time, I thought like a strategist. Revenge was not about humiliation or spectacle, it was about accountability and restructuring the life he had broken. I considered every avenue that could hold him to his choices: family interventions, social consequences, legal accountability, and most importantly, protecting my child from being drawn into a fractured adulthood. I imagined the future I wanted, one where my child saw a mother who stood up, who demanded respect, who modeled self-worth. That vision became more powerful than the fleeting satisfaction of public shaming. I wanted permanence, not a headline. I wanted to rewrite the narrative so that my child would not inherit the shame of a man's secret. Practical tactics included subtle moves that preserved my safety while increasing his sense of consequence. I began to attend gatherings alone with a composed face, letting others notice without me explaining. I made careful use of social media, not to broadcast pain, but to show life continuing, to document normalcy in a way that countered any attempts he might make to spin the story. I monitored financial accounts and sought advice about protecting assets. I learned about my rights, about custody timelines, about what it would take to secure a future for my child that didn't depend on a man who had betrayed us. Knowledge was an underappreciated edge. It calmed my anxiety because it told me what was possible and how to get there. But plan. And so I moved forward with a plan that balanced cunning with compassion, strength with strategy. I was careful not to allow hatred to become my entire identity. Instead, I let it be the engine that propelled me toward justice, toward safety, toward a future where my child could flourish. The days of silent suffering were over, replaced by daily steps, some small, some significant, that together formed a path out of the wreckage. I was learning the art of measured retribution, not the melodrama of humiliation, but the steady, devastating work of taking back what was rightfully mine: my peace, my security, my dignity, and the future of my child. The decision to stop being the victim rippled outward in ways I hadn't expected. People who had been complacent began to notice the shift, some applauded, some recoiled. He noticed it too, the calm in my voice, the precision of my actions, the way I no longer deferred to him. It unsettled him the way truth unsettles liars. Every step I took was both practical and symbolic, a reclamation of agency that would, in time, make it impossible for him to continue on the path he had chosen without facing consequences that matched the damage he had done. And as the days folded into plans, as documents accumulated and conversations were had and boundaries were enforced, I felt an unfamiliar, an intoxicating sense of control returning, a promise that I would not be defined by his betrayal but by the fierce, deliberate life I was building from its ashes, a life that would stand firm even if he tried to tear it down again. Planning my path of revenge step by step became less of a fantasy and more of a discipline, something I approached with the same care and focus as I would prepare for the arrival of my child. It wasn't about rage spilling uncontrollably anymore. It was about channeling that rage into actions that would leave no room for error. Every betrayal left its mark, every lie sharpened my resolve, and soon, I was no longer stumbling in. The second step was preparation. I began securing my future quietly, making small adjustments that he would not notice. I opened a separate bank account in my name only, transferring small amounts at a time, amounts insignificant enough to escape suspicion, but steady enough to build a reserve that was mine and mine alone. I reviewed legal options with a calm that belied the storm inside me, learning about custody laws, asset division, and the protections available to women who had been betrayed during pregnancy. I stored copies of essential documents in a place he would never find them: marriage certificate, financial records, even medical files. Each step might have seemed small, but together, they were threads weaving a safety net strong enough to catch me when the time came to cut him loose. The third step was strategy. Revenge could not be blind, it had to be purposeful. I didn't want to simply expose him. I wanted to ensure that when the truth came crashing down, it would dismantle the image he had so carefully built for himself. This meant timing. It meant patience. I reminded myself again and again that revenge delivered too early is wasted, but revenge delivered at the right moment is devastating. I imagined the look on his face when his double life unraveled in front of people he had lied to, when the image of the devoted husband and father collapsed under the weight of his own secrets. I didn't want whispers. I wanted consequences, undeniable and irreversible. The fourth step was control. Rage can be a dangerous master if left unchecked, so I taught myself to breathe through it, to let it fuel my planning instead of burning me alive. I learned the art of silence. When he expected me to scream, I smiled. When he anticipated accusations, I gave none. That silence unnerved him more than anger ever could, because silence is not weakness, it is preparation. He began to notice, I think, that something had changed, that I was no longer reacting the way I once did. And yet, as I mapped out each detail, I found myself changing. Planning revenge taught me not only how to hold him accountable, but how to rebuild myself. It forced me to think about who I wanted to become, not just who I wanted him to pay for making me. I realized that true revenge wasn't only about destroying him, it was about reclaiming the power he had tried to take from me. Each step was both a trap for him and a liberation for me. As I secured finances, I secured independence. As I gathered evidence, I strengthened my voice. As I planned for exposure, I planned for freedom. The path of revenge was no longer just about him. It was about me rising from the ashes of betrayal with fire in my eyes and steel in my spine. There were moments when doubt tried to creep in, whispering that maybe I was being too cold, too calculating, but then I would remember the baby shower, the decorations, the laughter, and the secret he carried in his phone while standing beside me. I would remember the nights I cried while he lied. I would remember the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Those memories fueled me, reminding me why I was doing this, reminding me that this wasn't cruelty, it was justice. The final step in my planning was patience. Revenge demands timing, and timing demands endurance. I learned to wait, to gather strength, to let the storm inside me build without exploding too soon. I moved like water, flowing around obstacles, adapting when needed, never losing sight of the destination. Patience is not easy when rage burns hot, but patience makes revenge sharp, precise, unforgettable. I reminded myself that every day he walked in his lies was one more day the truth grew heavier, one more day closer to the collapse I was orchestrating. Step by step, piece by piece, I built a path that was mine alone to walk. It was a path paved with evidence, with silence, with patience, with strategy. It was not reckless, it was not chaotic, it was Rebuilding my inner life required attention to the edges where betrayal had gnawed away at confidence. I sought out people who reflected strength back at me, friends who did not infantilize my grief, counselors who taught me how to channel rage constructively, mentors who showed me how to translate pain into purpose. I read accounts of women who had rewritten their lives after betrayals, not to copy their paths, but to borrow their courage. I practiced small acts of self-respect daily, asserting preferences, refusing demeaning remarks, taking time for exercise that made me feel physically competent again. The small victories collected into a larger sense of agency. I was not merely recovering, I was constructing a life that honored my values. Sometimes reclaiming power required confrontation, not for spectacle, but for accountability. I made choices about when to speak and when to hold my silence. When he tried to minimize or shift blame, I named the facts with calm precision. When he attempted to guilt me into silence, I refused. Public exposure was never my objective, but I recognized that truth has a way of rearranging alliances. I told family members important truths with careful framing, ensuring the focus remained on protecting the child rather than on petty revenge. Watching people I had thought neutral or indifferent take stock of the situation was a strange vindication, but my satisfaction was not in their realization of his faults so much as in my ability to steer the narrative toward safety and responsibility. Justice, for me, became practical and measured rather than performative. I worked with professionals who could translate emotional harm into legal protections. Attorneys who outlined custody strategies, financial counselors who helped me secure assets and plan for the future, therapists who helped me set boundaries that would preserve my mental health during any negotiation. Each pragmatic step I took was a way of transmuting helplessness into preparat.